G'day, Ian.
Kia ora, morena. Tani matinga.
Kia ora, Sonny.
Tēnā koe.
Have I got you there okay, David?
Yes, you do, Alan. You're not on screen yet, but yes, you're there.
Yep, okay. Hang on.
Yep, got you now.
All good there now?
Yep. I don't see Shane yet. Ah, kia ora,
Hi,
Shane.
Shane. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Shane. Morena, Alan.
Morning. Morning, Shane.
Morning.
Right, well, not sure where the applicant's team is at the moment.
Morning, Mr. Turner.
Good morning. How are you?
Good.
Aha.
Looks like a typing pool.
Hey, don't show your age quite so soon, Alan. Yeah. Right. So are we all here who needs to be here? I'm not sure that council's here yet, is it? It's Craig. Craig Sherman, are you here?
I am, Commissioner, yes.
Okay, all right, well, yeah, I'm not sure I can hear you particularly well, Greenseed.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Can you hear us okay now?
Yes, I appreciate you have to wear masks, but diction might be an issue for us, I think. But all right. Well, if we're sufficiently here, let's commence the hearing on this one. And Sonny, I understand that you'll do a karakia for us, please. Sonny, are you here again?
Kia ora, tēnā koe, David.
Sure.
Ai hoa tu tēnei waha e ngā whakamoi miti kia iho o ngā tini mātou ki tangati whakatoki rui i tēnei whenua. Nā nana hoki e whakatoki kaupapa ki whāwahi ana tātou ki mua i tāna aroaro. O tātou tīnana me o tātou wairua. Man nei whakamaru nei i a tātou i tēnei wā. Gloria ki te ringo tapu o te atua, hei manaki te o mātou ki ngā tu hei kia po te tau ki whero, te tuawhitu me te whare o te kāhui e reki, te tumu aki o te kingitanga ānuri, pai marere ki a rātou. Karanga mai kā mātou e pāna te commission hearing, he whiri whakaro, he kōrero tia, he kaupapa nui i tēnei rangi. Nō reira, ka inoi atu nei mātou, ko e nei mea katoa, i te ingo o te mātua, te tama, i te wairua tapu, ake. Āmene.
Kia ora, Sonny.
Tēnā tātou katoa, te mihi tuatahi me wehi ana ki tātua, me whakahonoro te kingi Māori atu hei te pototau te whero te tuawhiti, e te kāwi ara ki whānui, pai mārere kia rātou. Kei ngā tini aitu o mātou, ka tangi i o tātou I tēnei wā, moi mai te ringa o te atua, haere atu rā. A ko taupiri te maunga, ko wakato te awa, ko pototau te tangata, he peko he taniwha, ko wakato taniwha rei. Te mari e kia tātou katoa, nō reira, I rauranga tira mā, tēnā koutou, nau mai haramai, e te hui o tēnei rā, me te Zoom, o te Commission Hearing o Plan Change 7. Nau mai e ngā rangatira, e mihi ana kia tātou me ngā rangatira o Green Seed, mo te tau kaha, me tau mahi me o awhi, I te kaupapa o Plan Change 7. No reira ngā mana whenua, ngā e rauranga tira mā, tēnei te mihi atu, kia mai hoa kia tātou katoa. Tēnā koutou, a kia ora mai tātou. Ka tukuna tā rākau, kia koe, e tā hemana, Dave, tēnā koe.
Kia ora, Sally, thank you very much for that. Shane, I don't know if you want to respond, do you?
I'm here I might
Right. All right. Well, let's just get moving on hearing this plan change. It's been a while coming now. I think the three of us commissioners, and just introduce the commissioners. Alan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. My name's Alan Watson, and clearly I'm one of the commissioners on this exercise, and I've got quite a long background in town planning related matters and commissioner work, so kia ora. Thanks.
Thank you. Shane, do you want to say anything else?
I happy to marry a wife of our Shane Solomon John Wawa my wife wife of Shane Solomon. I'm appointed by the wife of
Shane, just to let you know, you're cutting in and out, so I don't know whether it's your mic or whether it's just reception, but just be aware of that. I'll give you a nod every now and again. Right, yes, kia ora koutou katoa. My name's David Hill, and I'm chairing this one. Just as a preliminary, I'd just like to acknowledge Luke O'Dwyer, who unfortunately passed away earlier this year. Luke was instrumental in bringing the three of us commissioners together to hear the Te Awa Lakes plan change way back, I think, and we started that in 2017, and that's now morphed into the same team hearing Rotakaria North. That very sad to hear the news that he passed away. So I'd just like to put that on the record. Just a couple of preliminaries. We're quite happy to accept the recommendation from Craig Sharman at I think it's 3.3 of his Section 42A report to accept the 3 late submissions, and I understand from Greenseed's point of view there's no objection to that. Just note that the three of us have not, obviously because of COVID, we haven't been able to do a site visit, or the three of us haven't been able to do one together. Shane was very familiar with the area. I'm broadly familiar with it. Whether we determine that we need to do a site visit before we close our decision on this one, I guess we'll take that under advisement, and I guess we'll just see what happens over the next few weeks with respect to our ability to travel. And the final preliminary that I want to note is just that we had determined and shared that view that we would adjourn after we've heard the evidence and submissions for the requester. And also I think Waka Kotahi is going to appear today as well. And we took that decision because it wasn't clear last week whether Waikato would be would remain in level 3 or move to level 2, whereby the submitters could all come together. I guess we'll just have to keep an eye on that as we go through the next day or so. We have been trying to get an alternate date, but it does look as though the entire November is unavailable for one or other of us. We do have a window next week on the 28th, I think it's the 28th, isn't it? Let me just have a look. Yes, 28th and 29th, we have a window that we will keep open to hear from submitters. I think if Waikato doesn't move to 2, obviously if Waikato moves to 2 next week, then that's not going to be a problem in terms of getting submitters together in the venue. If we remain at, or if Waikato remains at level 3 so that is not available, I think we will resume as a virtual hearing because otherwise we would have to move a resumed hearing into December. And that is getting perilously close. Some of you will be aware that there was an amended bill, a resource management bill that went into the House yesterday. And that bill has a rather threatening clause for private plan change proposers, whereby if hearings aren't completed by, as it stands at the moment, on the 20th of February, then those plan changes have to be withdrawn. And obviously, if we adjourn for hearing submitters through to December, there is a serious risk, without knowing whether that bill will pass or not, in its current form, there's a serious risk in actual fact that we would run hard up against that particular date if we determined that further information was required and the collecting of that further information pushed that date out. So just for the requesters' information, we're alive to that issue and we'll keep an eye on that issue, obviously. But at this stage, I think, and we'll confirm this later on, it looks as though we will resume this hearing for submitters on probably on Thursday next week, either Thursday or Friday of next week. And that will be either an in-person for the submitters or it will be virtual. So that's just a preliminary advice for everybody. Well aware that we've all been waiting for this hearing for some time. I think the commissioners were commissioned way back in January of 2020. So we've been on the hook on this one for some 22 months now. So it's nice to finally get here and to be able to progress it. So those are my preliminaries. I don't know, Alan, Shane, whether you have any other preliminaries you want to talk through?
You know, that covers everything off pretty well, David. Thanks.
Good for you, Shane. Okay. Well, all right. Well, first up, then we just have asked Section 42A author Craig Sharman just to update us as to where things have got to. We're aware that there's been, quite a bit of work being done since the 42A in terms of joint witness statements, and it would be very good for us to hear where council, where you have landed on some of those issues, so that we may not need to interrogate them any further. So, Craig, can I ask you just to give us that update, please?
Yes, I can do that, Mr. Chairperson. Morena tatou. I'll just find my notes. So, yes, so my name is Craig Sharman. I work for Becca as a planner. And in terms of the Plan Change 7 Rotokato North process, I'm the Section 42A report author. And so I'll be fairly brief, but it's just to give everyone an update, I suppose, on what has happened in the last few weeks, and in particular with expert caucusing. So just to go back a step just quickly, the Section 42A report was completed on 10 September 2021 with a positive recommendation to approve the plan change. And that was subject to several matters that were listed at paragraph 9.10 of the report for resolution, which was really foreshadowing the likelihood of expert caucusing prior to the hearing, or at least further discussions. So that expert caucusing then was invited by the Commissioner panel and commenced on 21 September. And the final session was held last week on 14 October. And during that time, there was a stormwater caucusing session. There was a planning and district plan provisions caucusing session, and there have been 4 sessions on transportation matters. So the caucusings proved to be a really highly effective process to work through issues in contention. And really I'd characterise it as it focused on the intent of a particular provision that was recommended through the Section 42A report, and then was really a discussion about the merits of alternatives to that, and then on almost all points we then settled on a mutually agreeable district plan provision to address that intent. So just in terms of the topic areas then, so for stormwater, which was the first topic that was subject to caucusing. So there was discussion around the matters identified in section 9.10 of the section 42A report, as many of them did relate to stormwater matters and some information items. So through that process, either additional material was then added to the integrated catchment management plan document and or the supporting stormwater reports. All the parties agreed in caucusing that that the item was not necessary for various kind of technical stormwater reasons. There were also several amendments on stormwater district plan provisions that were agreed between the parties. And then in terms of the planning provisions, so a single session, which was wide-ranging really in terms of its focus, and focused on district plan provisions in respect of neighbourhood parks in Rotorua North, ecology and landscape provisions, rear lanes and unit title, legal mechanisms for ownership and maintenance, requirements around a broad integrated transportation assessment and the requirements for the contents of that. We worked through some duplication of provisions that were between chapters and the merits of that. And we talked about service areas for residential dwellings, and there were several minor points within the residential zone provisions. And the last one was discussions around provisions around the consistency of future subdivision applications with the structure plans and what that was intended to ensure. Then for transportation, so over 4 expert caucusing sessions, the parties progressively worked through the transport provisions as they had been presented in the Section 42A report, and then within the applicant's evidence, the green seed evidence, and related issues to that. So broadly, that was the key staging and infrastructure provision for transport, which the rule reference for that is in Chapter 3, and it's 3.6a.4.2f. Also, the public transport provisions, the walking and cycling provisions. And while most of those points were agreed through the caucusing, within that rule, 3.6a.4.2f on transportation, Table 2, which is transport triggers and upgrades outside of Rotorua North, was not agreed. So everything otherwise through all the caucusing has been agreed by the caucusing parties, and that's as expressed through the joint witness statements that have been progressively made available on the council website. So that really means in respect of chapters 4 and 23 and 25, and then the various appendices to the district plan, which in terms of the plan change are 1, 2, 9, 15 and 17 being the district plan planning maps. There are no areas of disagreement now between the caucusing parties in respect of any of those chapters. So as I said, the point not agreed resides in Chapter 3 and is that rule 3.6a.4.2f, and in particular, just a part of the rule, which is Table 2, the transport triggers and upgrades outside of the plan change area. And then just in terms of how that's all been shown then through this process, so the reply statement of evidence from Renee Fraser-Smith and Mark Tolomark in respect of planning has an Annexure A attached to it. And that's a series of the district plan chapters and the appendices that are affected by the plan change. And within that, there's a markup version, which shows some strike through and some underlining, and also then a clean version of each of those. So each of the chapters then has a key on the first page, which is quite simple. It's the blue text is Plan Change 7, District Plan Amendments as it was notified, and then the green text are the subsequent changes to that notified text, and that's either recommended through the Section 42A report and or as agreed through the joint witness statements. So some of the Section 42A report recommendations that that it was agreed through expert caucusing were to be deleted. They are recorded in the joint witness statements, and they're not shown in the Annexure 2 chapters. So in other words, the chapters shown in Annexure, sorry, I think my reference is wrong there. The Annexure A to the reply statement in respect of planning shows the as agreed provisions. So anything that was in the 42A report that was not agreed, or that our council 42A team agreed could be deleted, is not shown in that chapter. So I've taken some time just to check through the Annexure chapters and the various changes through them, and I have a high level of confidence that they reflect very accurately the outcomes from the joint witness statements. Just in respect of the rule that's not agreed, it's shown within Annexure B to the reply statement of evidence in respect of planning from Renee Fraser-Smith and Mark Tollemache. So no doubt the Green Seed team will take us all through that in detail. But the Annexure B just helpfully sets out the council's position on that table 2 within that rule. The unagreed rule, and Green Seed likewise, there's an alternative there. So that's just to assist the commissioners to understand kind of where the parties got to in caucusing on that last remaining unagreed point, and that no doubt will be a point of discussion through the hearing. So that's really all I have, commissioners, unless there's any questions on any of that.
Just a question as to whether has there been any further discussion on that last matter since the JWS was, or since the supplementary statements were filed?
No, there hasn't been. So the final caucusing was Thursday morning, and I think on Friday of last week there was some email correspondence going backwards and forwards. I think what we have attempted to do within the 42A team is just to be as clear as we can be about the raw wording, I suppose, that the Section 42A report will recommend when we speak to that on day 2 or 3 at the hearing. So it's really a no on that. There just simply hasn't been time. So.
And are there any other matters lying outside of the joint witness statement matters that council is still concerned about?
No, there are not. So, I mean, that was the purpose in the 42A report, just to it finished with that section, or paragraph 9.10, which just set out some matters. And so the stormwater matters that are listed there have all been resolved. There are then 2 matters that relate to some diagrams that are really they've been agreed between the parties, and so they're resolved. And then the last bullet point was really a statement that there was just an awareness at the time of writing the 42A report that the plan change proponent Green Seed had concerns with various topics, and they were then all expressed and articulated through the through the plan change proponent's evidence, which then landed 2 weeks later, and then they've all been the subject of the caucusing. So, no, in terms of a 42A report recommendation, I'm very comfortable to recommend that the plan change be approved, and there's just the one unagreed point, which is an important point in respect of the transport upgrades, but it's very contained in terms of the plan provisions that it affects, and it doesn't have kind of tentacles into other parts of the district plan or affect any other topics.
The only other point I think I noted, and my colleagues might have some other points as well, related to a fairly strong disagreement at one point with respect to the duplex car parking issue. Is that still a live issue for council?
No, it's not. Yeah, I think it would be best to characterise it as, I think the urban designers don't quite agree on that point, but it doesn't play out in any respect in terms of district plan provisions. It's something that will no doubt play out in future subdivision and land use applications, but in the context of the detail of an application, which is really the right forum for that discussion.
Okay, all right, thank you for that. Alan, any follow-ups?
Yeah, just one point on that. Good morning, Craig. Just when you referred to outstanding issues and the like relating to transportation, and you've talked about the need for upgrades potentially outside that the subject area, I thought there was a concern in Leo Hills's evidence about the whether it was possible to define at this stage the actual alignment of cycleways and pedestrian ways. It might be a detail, it might be an urban design detail at this stage, but there was concern as to whether they were notated on the structure plan documents now, or whether they were left to be decided with council at a later stage. Do you have any views on that at all?
Well, that was one of the topics at Transport Caucusing of last week, and so the debate was around whether there should be a diagram or a figure within the plan change, which basically displays a walking and cycling network. And the parties through caucusing agreed in the end that that's a no. That attempting to kind of articulate a future network, particularly for off-road, at a structure plan kind of scale, where we're talking about 140 hectares and all of the kind of nuances of that, the parties really landed on the fact that that actually doesn't serve a useful purpose, and that it's been managed through other ways, and those other ways are assessment matters and information requirements, and so it'll be played out again through some future subdivision applications.
Yeah, so just as a follow-on from that then, so are you confident in terms of advising council that they will have sufficient authority or sufficient powers, whatever, to actually put into effect what they think is desirable in terms of cycleway linkages at a future time?
Yes, I am, and I think in many ways I don't want to steal the thunder from Greenseed, because no doubt they'll take us through their proposals in terms of there's a pretty sophisticated kind of set of concepts and thinking here in terms of an on-street walking and cycling network and how that connects to different things, and that's really highly integrated with their thinking around street networks and a kind of a grid style of layout and avoidance of cul-de-sacs. And there's a whole lot of interconnected measures here that all kind of speak to each other and speak to that issue.
Yep. Fine, that's great. Thanks. Thanks, David.
Shane, any matters?
Thank you, Craig. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Craig, I think just let me flag one other issue, which I'll raise later on today. The affordable housing element of the plan change. I mean, my assumption, and as I say, I'll get that agreed or not later on. But my assumption is that the idea of 15 dwellings being the threshold for this comes straight out of the Hasher orders that were. I had did a lot of decisions under Hasher, so I'm familiar with that, with the 15 threshold. Just in terms of then you move to the as is proposed, I think it's a 90% of average of the house sales price, which is not where Hasher and the orders were at. They were at 75% of the median. I just wondered, in terms of council's position on that, does council have a position with respect to that affordable housing component with respect to other matters within the plan, or I'm not quite sure whether any of the other plan changes that have gone through recently have adopted an affordability criterion like that.
So no, they haven't, and so council's position on the affordability provisions is really a fairly neutral one. So the Greenseed team, no doubt, will kind of take us through the history of where that came from. But yeah, I mean, as you know, it is Rotokauri North as a growth cell and as a proposal for urbanisation came from that Hasher context, and so through Section 42A report, I haven't sought to amend or particularly challenge any of those, and they are as proposed by Greenseed, and they've been unchanged through the 42A recommendations.
All right. Thanks, Craig.
Thank you.
Appreciate that update. Right. Helen, back to you and your team.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's Simon Berry.
Oh, yes. Good. Hi, Simon.
How you doing?
Better than you, I hope.
So we're happy to pick up from here, sir. I'm normally used to standing up, but if I stand up, you won't be able to see me. You'll just be looking at my watch.
I can't see you anyway because I've got a whole lot of other people who where you're sitting on this. Ah, yes, right.
Thank you, sir. So, Ms. Andrews is the remainder of our legal team along with Olivia Manning. If I take you through our screen, in the bottom left-hand corner is Gary Noland from Greenseed or Maid. Behind him is Renee Fraser-Smith, one of the joint planning witnesses. Olivia Manning at the back.
Right.
And then at the back on the other side is Mark Tolamash.
I noticed the shine. Yes, right.
And then coming forward, Helen and myself, sir.
Yes.
Just by way of preliminary.
Have you provided the masks, have you, Simon? You all seem to be wearing the same.
No, sir, it's just, I'm actually the only one who has a different mask.
Right.
But while we're on that point, if I can signal to you so that everybody knows that we checked with MB as to the arrangements for this hearing in order so that we could be together in one room, because we figured that would be the most useful to you rather than us being across a whole bunch of screens. We've been approved to be here socially distanced as we are with masks on, but the person who is speaking doesn't need to wear a mask. And of course, we don't want to filter our coffee or lunch through one either, but that's another story. So just to be very clear about that. Secondly, sir, we were very pleased to see when you came on the screen that you weren't wearing a tie, at which point
Yeah.
there was a massive releasing of ties and suit coats, which are lying around the floor at the moment. So we're grateful for that. I was going to make a submission that you may be in breach of your requirement to run the hearing without unnecessary formality if you made us wear one, but I wasn't going to go on a ditch over that.
Well, just to let you know, this is the starting position. If you want to get more informal, be my guest.
Okay, well, if you want to drop some handy hints in that regard, sir, I've got plenty of shorts I'd quite like to wear. Thirdly, just while that's hanging in the air in terms of the conversation that was just had in relation to the affordability provisions, Hamilton Housing Accord was 90%, not 75. 75 was the Auckland position.
Right.
So that's what,
Yeah, it was also a difference between the median and the average, so I was interested in that, but it's of no particular moment. It's just interest.
yes, sir. And the last point I'd make by way of preliminary comment is that we're extremely grateful for the extremely constructive manner in which this application or this plan change application has been case managed. And in particular, the conferencing that has occurred has resulted in a context in which, as you could hear from Mr. Sharman, that the issues which need to be dealt with in the context of something of this magnitude fall within a very narrow compass. So we're very grateful to you for that. It's been an excellent process. The last preliminary comment I'd make, given that I said the last one was the last one, was that in terms of the dealing with the Waikato submitters, we entirely endorse the concept that if the Waikato does not go into level 2 this Friday, when that decision's made, we would definitely want to continue with the virtual hearing. One, for the new reason that you outlined, sir, but secondly, simply in order to keep the pot boiling and to enable the matters to be dealt with in a timely way. So we would have made the submission that occur, and in fact we do make the submission that even if that's opposed by any parties, we would definitely want to continue with the hearing on those dates next week.
Yeah. All right. Noted. Thank you.
So I'm now in your hands, Mr. Chairman, as to the extent to which you require any comments on the legal submissions. I know you would have read them. I'm happy to sort of trot through them, but also I'm also happy to simply leave it and answer any questions. So I'm in your hands in that regard.
Well, thank you for that, Mr. Berry. Alan and Shane, I don't know whether you have any questions or whether you want to go to questions or whether you want to hear a summary of the legals.
Shall I just do a 10 minutes highlights package, sir?
Fine, fine.
We put the timer on 10 minutes.
Okay.
Yes.
You know me better than I thought, Alan.
Yes. That's the problem when we're known to each other, isn't it?
Yes, it is. So I start with a statement of the bleeding obvious, as I always do, that this is the hearing of Plan Change 7, made by Green Seed. We needed a private plan change because we have a future urban zoning and obviously can't proceed without it, and the thresholds would be too high as a non-complying activity. Rotocary structure plan and the future-proof strategy anticipate that this land will be developed not until 2036 or 2045. So this is a significant opportunity to make a difference to the housing crisis. The plan change will enable a high-quality residential community to be established at the northern gateway to Hamilton, supported by an appropriately sized neighbourhood centre. And when we say that, we mean sized in order not to create any concerns in terms of retail competition that would impact on the function of other centres as distinct from creating competition. The opportunity to provide up to 1,600 to 2,000 much needed houses is available because Green Seed will itself provide the infrastructure required to service the development in the same way as it has done in establishing the Oranga community in Drury West. And that has been a flagship project which we will be referring to, particularly via Mr. Nolan's evidence, because it provides the context that says this is the model that enables us to aggregate this much land and provide the services, which means that a significant consideration, which often stands in the way of development of this scale, is not an issue. And I don't know how much you know about the Drury provisions, but you know, the Auckland Council people are saying, oh, well, look, all this new legislation that we have in order to gain funds is a bit complicated for us, and it's untested, and we're only Auckland Council, so we're not going to try and grapple with that. You don't have to worry about that because we've got it sorted. I couldn't resist an opportunity to have a dig at the Auckland Council, gratuitous as that may be. Green Seed has a proven track record in being able to deliver infrastructure at pace in order to support large-scale greenfield development. So that's the point I really just made. We're also acutely aware of the proximity of this area to the Waikato River, and that's reflected in the setting up of a tangata whenua working group and very constructive discussions which have occurred and which have resulted in support for what is proposed, and that will be covered in evidence. We also would like to acknowledge the point you made, sir, about Luke, a good friend to all of us and a very competent and basically really bloody lovely guy, and we were sad about it, but he was central to this. And in some ways, if it doesn't sound weird, we'd quite like to acknowledge and dedicate the effort that this team is putting into this hearing to him. And the important thing in terms of this context is that it reflects the very high level of agreement that we have with Hamilton City and indeed other agencies, but particularly Hamilton City, in seeing this matter through. And if you think about what Mr. Sharma just said, while those issues are significant, and I'm not trying to downplay them, they're pretty nickel and dime stuff in the context of a plan change of this magnitude. So we're grateful for that. The short point is I'm down at 1.9 now. The only outstanding matters between Green Seed and Hamilton City relate to 2 outstanding transportation matters. And the only outstanding matter between Green Seed and the Regional Council relates to some public transport issues, which are of course very difficult to provide for in the context of a district plan as distinct from, side agreements and provision made under land transport and local government legislation. Just to confirm, the Green Seed has a management interest or ownership of 90% of the land, and it has always endeavoured to try to be a good neighbour, acknowledging, however, that there have been a large number of submissions, and when a change of this magnitude is going to occur, that is expected, and it is with respect to the concerns raised by submitters that so much effort has been put in to address the concerns that they have raised. So at 1.13, we just simply make the point that our planners have concluded that PC7 meets the relevant statutory test for a proposed plan change. It represents the most appropriate way to achieve the purpose of the RMA and the objectives of the Hamilton District Plan, and will give effect to the Waikato RPS, which of course incorporates future-proof. And we all know that the land release strategies in future-proof and the intent of the National Policy Statement on Urban Development contemplates precisely the type of nature, the type of development of the nature we're looking at, which represents an opportunity to provide for a well-functioning urban environment in an out-of-sequence context. This is the epitome of one of those developments in our submission, and it's captured really in Mr. Nolan's evidence. It says, proposal that will deliver much needed high quality development in Rotokauri North. The housing will be part of a livable, sustainable community with open space, connectivity, schools, and small scale retail convenience offerings that will meet all its residents' needs. So we commend that development to you. In terms of the site visit, I was at a hearing last week or the week before in which Google Earth was used quite effectively to at least make connections from an aerial kind of perspective in terms of what was going on. Although I must say it was a much smaller context. So I just thought I'd make that observation. Turning the pages now on the submissions, I don't need to address chapter 2 at all. That's really just our the order of the witnesses that we would be presenting, and reflects precisely what was in the memorandum we filed with the evidence. We're grateful for the indication that Messrs. Cruikshank, Miller, Heath, Holland, and Ms. Nicholson aren't required to attend.
And we should add to that we're quite comfortable with Rob Pryor being excused as well. If we have any issues that come up in the course of today that we think he would usefully address, we can put that forward in informal questions for him.
Appreciate that, sir. It's now 10:43, and I have 2 minutes of my 10:44. I have 2 minutes of my 10 minutes to go. So I'm going to breach that, with Commissioner Watson, and next time you see me, I owe you a beer. So procedural background, 80 submissions and 8 further submissions were lodged. All of this stuff is covered in significant detail in what we see as being a very good Section 42A report. I've commented on the expert conferencing and also the Section 42A report, which we don't need to cover. At the bottom of page 8, we've set out the amendments that have been made to PC7 since it was notified. The substantive nature of those issues recognise or reflect the quality of the caucusing which was undertaken and the soundness of the outcomes. We've made the submission at 3:15 that the nature of the submissions filed in relation to the plan change mean that in our submission in terms of the relevant legal authorities, all of those submissions are, quote, on the plan change, and all of the amendments which are proposed fall within the scope of that, so that you have jurisdiction to impose them in the context of your decision making. There's a whole bunch of case law on that. If you had any doubts about that, we'll address that in reply or tomorrow. But we decided it wasn't worth going into the case law on that.
No, I mean, let's just tick that off now. Let me just check with my fellow commissioners. Are either of you got any scope issues that you think should be addressed?
No.
And I'm in the same camp on that one, so we can put that one to bed at this point.
Grateful for that indication, sir. So the issues that remain in contention can be summarised as follows, and essentially there is nothing: rural roads, existing traffic issues, transportation modelling, construction traffic effects, road networks surrounding PC7, walking and cycling. They're all essentially transportation issues. And if that's all we really have on the table at the end of the day, we're in very good shape. Chapter 4 is the background to green seed and PC7. I don't think any of this is new to you, and I wouldn't propose to take you through that. It's there for completeness. I guess it's worth pointing out that at 410 there are no solely urban design issues for the panel to determine. Thank God. There's not many hearings that we go into these days that that's not the case. So I know Mr. Munro's listening, but he may have an easy day today. And related procedures, we've just noted at 411 some of the relevant background that you don't really need to take into account, but contextually we wanted you to understand where previous procedures fit. Similarly with chapter 5, this is a fairly lengthy chapter. There is nothing here you don't know, and it's all there for completeness, because at the end of the day we can't bring ourselves to delete it because we've written it, but here it is. and Commissioner Hill, you and I both know what that's like.
Yep.
I do briefly at 529 in terms of legal principles relevant to PC7, that's the long bay test. It really isn't necessary to go through that, but it will become for you a bit of a checklist when you're making your determinations, and it's a fairly, it's lengthy, but it's useful. A useful capture of the entire set of provisions in a stepwise kind of manner. So we commend that to you, and it's the law anyway. Once again, moving off the statute to the policy and planning framework. Obviously, the National Policy Statement for Urban Development. I mean, the latest signal from the government as of yesterday, it's a complete bolt out of the blue, as far as I'm concerned, signals how seriously this issue is being taken. And the NPSUD directs councils to enable more housing and business to be built where there will be access to jobs, community services, public transport, and to respond to market demand. And Hamilton is a Tier 1 council that is required under that provision or that instrument to make provision and make decisions in accordance with the direction of that policy statement, and in particular the clear directive on decision makers to be responsive to out of sequence development such as PC7. You will have heard about the Aviniwai development, and that the NPSUD featured quite strongly in the decision making there that said, you know, we tick the boxes for out of sequence development. When you're looking at the opportunity to provide for 1,600 or 2,000 homes in the context in which we saw the type of bill that was announced yesterday is not to be sneezed at. The Eden Epsom decision is an odd one. And I don't know whether you want to get into this.
No, I'm very familiar with that one from having exercised my thinking on it on a couple of occasions already. So, yeah.
So I'm happy to leave that as basically potentially an aberration that in our submission doesn't detract from the thrust of that as something you can, the thrust of the NPSUD that you can take fully into account in the context of your decision making. And unless we need to debate that, then we can move past it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think, I mean, we'll deal with that in the decision, obviously, but as I understand Green Seed's argument is that the merits of the plan change as proposed, it doesn't need to rely upon whatever findings on the NPSUD we come up with.
Precisely, sir. So it's a bit of a, if we take the intent of the NPSUD, we're clearly delivering on that in spades. And if there's any detraction from that in terms of that decision, we say it doesn't matter. The planning assessment, again, you've read the evidence, I don't need to take you through that. Consultation and stakeholder engagement, once again, there's been a stack of that and it's been very effective. We just set out there so that you can see it without me needing to read it, what was done. And despite all of that, there are still submissions and that's fine because, as we said, the remaining issues fall into a fairly narrow context anyway. I take it, given the signal that you don't require to hear from this this group of witnesses, that we really don't need to get into site suitability and site constraints. The bottom line is that the site is fine. The biggest challenge was its flatness and the amount of and the high water table. But as the members of the committee will be aware, there's no engineering problem that can't be. Well, maybe not, but certainly this one can be addressed.
Well, I was wondering about that, and wasn't cheeky of me to raise the issue of development contributions, given Mr. Maher's public statements on the matter.
Yes. but you don't want a submission on that?
No, I don't think so.
Thank you. Again, provision for Three Waters infrastructure has been thoroughly examined, and water, wastewater, and in particular stormwater, in terms of the conversation we're having, have all been adequately addressed and dealt with in detail in the evidence. Chapter 10 really raises probably the key issues in the context of this hearing, and because that's the case, I won't read these because we're going to hear it at length, I suspect, from Mr. Hills. All we would say, cutting to the chase, at 10:19 is that on the basis of the evidence referred to, we submit that you can be satisfied that the outstanding issues raised by Hamilton City and Ms. Peering for the locals with respect to the provision of transport infrastructure are adequately addressed in the PC7 provisions recommended by Mr. Hills, which Greenseed supports and accepts. That there is sufficient certainty regarding the funding and financing of all required infrastructure, including as a result of the PDA that Greenseed has entered into with Hamilton City. So that I'm referring there to the private developer agreement, and you can have that conversation with Mr. Nolan. Chapter 11 deals with multicultural and spiritual considerations. Once again, that's reflected, the concern and care to ensure that that matter is properly addressed is reflected in the formation of the Tangata Whenua Working Group and the preparation and acknowledgement of the cultural impact assessment, which and the engagement of Mr. Hill. So now we've got Chairman Hill, Leo Hills, and this Mr. Hill, but I'm sure you're going to be able to sort that, Mr. Chairman. The mitigation measures that are included, that have been put forward by the Tangata Whenua Working Group, set out in 11.4. In the Waikato, in the context of the vision and strategy, getting that right is really important. And I see Commissioner Solomon nodding his head, and Commissioner Solomon, we obviously this is going to be a matter of particular focus for you, but Greenseed is satisfied that it has done all it could have and in relation to this issue, and that there's no matter of concern outstanding. Once again, in terms of other environmental effects, the fact that we don't, that the panel didn't need to hear from any of these witnesses reflects that these matters have been adequately put to bed and don't need to be addressed. Leads us to the planning assessment at page 38. And again, that's a matter that's going to be played out today and possibly tomorrow. And our principal submission is one that I would rather leave to the end of the hearing. So with that, sir, it's been more like 20 minutes, but I think I've got away pretty well with that.
We're not giving anything away in terms of our faces, Mr. Barry. Right. Thank you very much for that. And Alan, any questions?
Yeah, perhaps one question there, if I may, Mr. Berry, just in terms of you mentioned early on in your legal submissions, and acknowledge the comprehensive nature of them, obviously, but you talk about providing the infrastructure required to service the development. Is a cost-sharing arrangement being sorted out on all those matters at this stage, or is that something that's left to future consideration?
Well, it's all reflected in the PDA. So there's a development agreement between Greenseed and the council in which those matters were all addressed, and Mr. Nolan is intimately familiar with that document, and he'll be our next witness, so he could address any matters of greater detail than that if you'd like to hear from him.
It would be interesting, I think, having read the submissions and the concerns that have been put forward by them, just to hear in that respect, or a confirmation through one of your witnesses that those details have all been sorted out and they're not being left to a later stage, that it's going to be a problem or a debate at a later stage about who pays for what and how, etc., etc. And that seems to be quite fundamental to your legal submission. So it'd be good to see that supported if we could. Thanks.
Yeah, Hamilton City very clear that it wants a lot of certainty in relation to those issues. So Gary Nolan can answer those questions in more detail.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, David. I don't have anything else at this stage.
Shane?
Yeah, my question would be for Mr. Nolan, but just the commitment to the future-proof strategy and the building free waters and public transport, that the proposal aligns with that strategy. Just confirming that.
That was hard to hear. So could you repeat that, please? It's just hard to hear.
Yep, sorry.
That's
In terms of the future-proof strategy, this proposal aligns with that strategy in terms of free waters and public transport, etc.
Right. So that this proposal, in terms of the future-proof strategy, this proposal aligns with that document in terms of three waters and public transport. Was that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Certainly, in terms of three waters, I don't think there could be any argument that it doesn't in that regard. The issue in relation to public transport, and we're struggling with that a little bit at Aohiniwa at the moment as well, is how much you can put in a district plan in relation to the requirements for public transport, given that there's other legislation that primarily governs that issue. And so, for example, one of the debates we're having in the context of Aohiniwa is, can you have a plan provision that says frequent and whatever bus services, and how a district plan can provide for frequent bus services, we don't get. But certainly that issue has been covered in some detail, and we have no doubt that when time comes, those needs will be met. It's still a little way apart from the regional council in terms of how that should be delivered. It may well be that at the end of the day, because of limitations on what can be addressed in a district plan, it may need to be, the gap may need to be addressed by way of some type of MOU. Simply in order not to overreach and have a provision that then creates difficulty of monitoring and application later. I think Mr. Tolomash may be able to help you more with that a little later, other than Mr. Hills, who is obviously familiar with the triggers for public transport delivery.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I don't think we've been advised to the contrary, but I think the regional council is not appearing, I think is the last advice I was given. So presumably if they continue to have concerns on that matter and the provisions that are in the proposed plan change, they would raise that, or would have raised that for us.
Yes, sir. And I think it probably does reflect their acknowledgement that there's only so much you can do on the face of a district plan, and that solving this issue, the issue will be solved, but it will be solved somewhere other than here today.
Okay. All right. Is that sufficient for you, Shane? Okay, good. All right. I've got no questions, Mr. Berry. I'm happy to move to your witnesses.
Right. Well, thank you, sir. So the first witness is Mr. Nolan. He has a brief summary at chapter 2 of his evidence, as all of our witnesses other than our planners do. Would you like him to read that, or do you want to go straight to questions? Or would you like him to give you a 5-minute highlights package?
And not one of your 5 minutes, perhaps one of our 5 minutes. Yes, Mr. Nolan, feel free.
So if it was my 5 minutes highlights package, that's like 12 minutes.
Mr. Nolan.
Yeah, if he could just maybe speak to it briefly and then answer any questions.
Yeah. Welcome, Mr. Nolan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Firstly, just like to compliment everyone that's been involved in the process and reiterate what Simon has. It's been a great process so far, a long process with lots of consultation and all in good spirit. So it's been quite a unique process for us. So I just want to compliment everyone who's been involved. I think the key thing for me to point out is that MAID is a company that, whilst it's involved in property development, it's focused on people. And the key thing for us is not the built form, it's the community that we leave at the end of the process. So we don't measure ourselves on sites and lots and built form, it's the community and how it's thriving once we are no longer involved in it. And so when we look at everything, we looked around the world to see what is this the one thing, or what are the things that create thriving communities or thriving cities. And we've determined that it comes down to a sense of community, spirit, and a willingness to cultivate that. And so then we looked at, okay, well, that's what we've got to engender into all that we do. How do we do that? And we sort of identified 4 pillars which we believe are capable of uniting people from sort of different cultures and different views into our community. And so we focus on these 4 pillars in all that we do when we start the development. And so these are ecology, that's sort of goodness of creation. So in all we do, we want to make sure that we're enjoying, nurturing and sustaining creation for abundance. Anthropology, which is the dignity in serving. So, we believe that every human being is inherently endowed with worth and dignity, and that's something that, we need to be focused on. Sociology, which is the security of belonging. So we come together in unity to respect and celebrate our diversity. So that's truly bringing community together. And from the economy's point of view, the joy and generosity. So the reality, actually, there is an abundance in the world, and the more you realise that, the more it actually comes true. So the joy and generosity and giving is something which is inherent in all we do. So when we look at our developments, we look at them in twofold. We look at them from a hardware point of view, so that's the built form, that's the land and built form, and then a software point of view, which is the people form. So we have a full engagement team, which are solely focused on the software component of any development. So just to, I'll skip on because I know I've only got 5 minutes and I'll probably speak for a long while. I'm sorry because I get a little bit passionate about it. But in terms of our business model, to do what we need to do, we need to operate at scale. So we need to be working with different groups of capital. So there's patient capital that needs to be in for the long term to help us aggregate large scale sites, because we need scale to do what we want to do. And then we have the capital that's focused on infrastructure, capital that's focused on the built form, and then other capital that actually is invested in the software / community side of things. So we have all of those sources of capital at our disposal right now, and we've used them in order, which is an example I'll get to shortly. So when we signed the PDA with Council back in 2019, we did that in the knowledge that we had the funding to enable us to put in place the infrastructure that was required in that private development agreement. So that took care of the 3 waters and some of the roading issues. Private reserves, it didn't address public transport, which is something that's very talked to already, but I'll equally talk to that in a second. And on the matter of development contributions, we are always, and we've publicly stated, we are happy to pay what is a fair and equitable contribution. bearing in mind what we're already doing. And we've done that in Drury already. We've forward paid $30 million in infrastructure in Drury. We had consented 2,500 sites, but we invested in infrastructure that unlocked 6,000 sites in terms of wastewater and bulk water, and we did that up front together with all of the community parks and walkways, cycle and piers, before we had a single site able to be developed. So we know how to do it. We know that we have capital that understands the value proposition of upfronting that investment and how that enhances the community. So in terms of the vision for Rotokauri, we're looking at 140 hectares, 1,600 to 2,000 homes, a fully integrated community with neighbourhood centre schools, reserves, the opportunity for us to implement multimodal transport, which is something we're doing in in Drury right now. That's e-scooters, e-bikes. We seeded the community with the first 30 people getting free e-scooters. We're subsidising e-bikes. We've got Beam and big city bikers invested into the community and encouraging and training people on how to use and ride safely. We've also got a major corporate who are subsidising subscription EVs so that people have access to EVs that they don't have to own, but when they need them, they're available. And we are now about 3 months away from having regulatory approval for AVs, so automated vehicles on road. So not the OMIO model, which has to be off-road. This is fully automated on-road AV shuttles, which will connect the community with the school and our town centre. So those initiatives we're looking to bring into Rotokauri will be obviously well advanced in our thinking of them, because we'll be implementing them in Auckland. So by the time we get Rotokauri through to a point where there's a built form, we'll be well advanced in our understanding of all that. I think, but more importantly for us, our engagement team will bring not only innovation around the transport, but they're looking at urban agriculture, how we work with iwi around job creation with MSD. We have a contract with MSD around funding new jobs, iwi around nursery opportunities for planting. So if we grow in Rotokauri and plant in Rotokauri, how we enhance the placemaking role to extend to education, and how do we engage the MOE in the opportunity to use the natural environment in their learning environment. We're doing this already in Drury and Oranga, and we'll bring the same strategy down into to Rotokauri. Just touching on infrastructure, so our PDA, I believe, covers pretty much everything that we're required to do around the three waters, as I've already mentioned, and that's funded. We've spent the last 4 years well engaged with Tangata Whenua Working Group, key stakeholders, the community, Hamilton City, and I think we've been willing to listen, and that's what's resulted in us hiring a whole new stormwater team and redesigning our whole stormwater solution and the master plan to reflect that, plus removing one of the state highway connections, because we've heard the feedback and we're happy to work with the community to address the concerns. So I've gone well 5 minutes, but we're happy that with the 42A that council's positive recommendation, and from our point of view, we commend Plantation 47 to the panel with the development that we believe will deliver a transformative residential community to Rotokauri North and Hamilton, consistent with our core values. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thanks, Nolan. Alan?
Yeah, nothing from me. No, that's covered off my my considerations. Thanks.
Okay, Shane?
Yeah, you've answered my questions. Thank you.
I think the only question I've got, Ms. Nolan, is just to be clear, what's the question? The question is Green Seed and Made, are they full-fledged developers in terms of construction of you, or do you simply sell the sections and that's the end of your involvement?
So we do a combination. We're predominantly in the land subdivision and community component, and we have build partners that do the built form. But we do residents associations with design guidelines to ensure that the built form is created in a form.
Yeah, well, I guess that was where my question was going. Is the amount of control that you or your organisation actually has to realise the final result, by the sounds of it, is obviously critically dependent upon the provisions that will be in the plan change, because at that point you're no longer involved.
Yes, yeah. But we do take a step further in having a residents association which has decided.
Yeah, no, I know it's the provision requiring that. I guess, and it'll be questions for Mr. Munro, I guess, in terms of that issue, in that there is no formal master planning that's actually provided with the plan change. It's a suite of provisions which lead you to that, hopefully, to that result.
Sure. Yes. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Nolan. Next witness.
Yeah. Do you want to say that? I think it is at our own list, isn't it?
But there's no formal master plan.
No. Yeah, it's the same as in Drury at Oronga. There's no formal master plan. It's the same environment, and it's led to a great result there. So we're confident.
Yeah, well, I guess I tucked in the back of my head that we should probably have a look at that development in due course. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, at that point, Mr. Munro is the man of the moment. So if I could ask him to unmute and become visible and give us a
It's not often people invite Mr. Munro to unmute themselves. Yes.
He's got the time.
Here he is.
Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hope you don't mind. I've been in lockdown so long, I was really quite chuffed that my shirt fit, and I was able to remember how to actually tie a tie. So I've kept mine on, if you don't mind. I'm quite chuffed.
That's fine. I mean, my main concern is that I'm becoming looking more and more like Maggie Thatcher every day until I can get a haircut.
I don't know what you're talking about. So just to skip through the summary, and mindful of the comments you just made to Mr. Nolan, perhaps it's easier for me just to directly make some comments at the end of my summary. To skip through section 2 of my evidence, we're talking about an area of land that has been through the proper council-led identification process for future urban purposes, subject to a structure planning process. That structure plan, because the work we've done involved going through all the technical reports that the structure plan was based on, were very comprehensive. It wasn't a case of someone had one idea to just identify a patch of land with some lines on it. There was a lot of landscape assessment, a lot of development assessment, a lot of social and recreational assessment, and assessments regarding accessibility to employment land, and so on. 2.2, I've just summarised the report that accompanied the request that was lodged, just saying, look, it has been done properly. The requestor in this case supported the proposal the consultants, including me, gave, which was to try and develop this process hand in hand with the council and the staff. 2 design workshops specifically were held in Hamilton in the council's offices with staff over a period of several days to try and understand issues, see where one could meet minds, and I think the result's been very successful. At 2.4, since lodgement, refinements have been made in response to ongoing transportation and stormwater engineering assessments. That's relatively normal. This site's main challenge with stormwater is that it's so flat. The flows require a great deal of work for a sheet flow, and getting that right has taken time. But the refinements that have resulted haven't changed the fundamentals. They haven't changed the principles. And I'm satisfied, having been involved in the fly on the wall and all of that, that the position that's been landed on vis-a-vis access, key road structure, future stormwater needs, will still be able to support a very successful built form outcome in terms of a new neighbourhood. 2.5, I don't think the submissions that have been raised really require any specific urban design commentary. That's not to dismiss the issues or concerns that have been raised. It's just to say, from the issues that I look at and my expertise, I don't think there's anything I need to add to that. Then moving into the areas where there was some disagreement, from 2.7 to 2.9, this issue of the duplexes. My understanding is that the council is in agreement with the provisions that have been proposed in chapters 4 and 23, and that while some concern has been raised around one particular duplex configuration, the council is electing to use the subdivision process later on as the forum where it will exercise those concerns and think about it. That's what I understand the situation to be. But based on the provisions that have been agreed to in chapters 4 and 23, as far as I'm concerned, the outcome I recommend and prefer has been enabled, and on that basis, I'm happy. Going through from 2.10 to 2.11, I think there's agreement that there should be an appropriate provision of recreation reserves. There's no debate there. It was just about how locked in can these be at this stage. I think the agreement is that it is sensible to plan these through a subdivision exercise when there's much better understanding of precise placement of roads, precise earthworks, precise configuration with green networks and so on, so that we don't end up with a park that's required to be located in what turns out to be the wrong location, or is otherwise onerous to reposition. And I've seen some structure plans where that has unfortunately happened and created a few problems. But the principal, commissioners, is that everyone agrees that this development will need public reserves, and that the plan provisions provide appropriate mechanisms for those to be tested, nominated. And let's not forget, when it comes to new public reserves, councils do have a little bit more clout than they normally get when it comes to assessing resource consent applications, because there are LGA requirements for the provision of reserves as well. And so it does have a bit of an ace up its sleeve there. Turning through 2.12 onwards to 2.14, again, there's no disagreement that a very well-functioning, safe, convenient and attractive transport network's going to be required for all modes, particularly including pedestrians and cyclists. That will include on-road and off-road links. As I've said, I think the main role of those green networks for the off-road links will actually be lateral bridging across and over streams and waterways to connect roads on either side of green features, rather than extensively running parallel to roads. But the issue was, again, how much specificity is it appropriate or necessary to try and second guess at this stage? And I think the provisions that have been agreed to, I can't see how anyone could escape proper scrutiny at resource consent. And I think the council has all the powers there. It has a very enthusiastic team of engineers. You've seen evidence from them that are very committed to these outcomes. I can't see the lack of a tail pinned to a donkey on a structure plan at this stage as raising any risk that there's going to be some defect or deficiency in what's delivered. And then at 2.14, commissioners, overall, Ms. Fraser-Smith has taken me through the most recent provisions that have resulted from the joint witness statements, and that has tweaked a little bit from what my evidence was based on. But I'm still very comfortable where that's landed, and I feel that the built form outcomes I'm interested in will still be properly enabled and achievable, and from the council's perspective, governable. In terms of the question you raised of Mr. Nolan, excuse me. This issue of certainty, what I've seen over the last 20 years is that in the 1990s, there was still a great deal of developer resistance to providing well-connected street networks. And it's primarily because they were losing developable land. A sort of loopy cul-de-sac based lot layout can take up something like 20% of a land area. A really well-connected grid can take as much as 30 or 35%. And so there was clearly at that stage when I don't even want to say urban design, I just want to say good planning was in the resurgence. There was a bit of resistance and a lot of developers really had to be brought to heel because it was not in their interest to deliver those. 20 years on though, it's now accepted across the industry. And I don't say this to be disrespectful, but even engineers and surveyors now support and promote well-connected street networks. It's not just the design people seen as a fringe lunacy promoting something. I think we've passed that penetration across the industry where it's no longer a debate that there should be route choice and connections and land uses that relate to streets. That's now, I think, becoming a norm. And it's interesting, I actually had a discussion with Judge Smith not too long ago about what urban designers do. And this came up because it was a really good example of how what urban designers used to have real fights about 20 years ago has just become so normalized into day-to-day planning practice that it's not actually even needed to be debated in many instances. It's just accepted. And when I look at the provisions that are proposed here, one, they're consistent with what I've seen in a number of other developments that haven't relied on a fixed master plan, which have nonetheless been successful. I think they're understood, I think they're clear, and I think they're very administrable. I'm very comfortable that there is going to be a well-connected network that results. I'm very comfortable that provision has been made for high-quality pedestrian and cycle movement along the edges of those streets, including provision being made for rear lanes, which specifically are about trying to avoid the frequency of vehicles reversing across footpaths, which is unfortunately still a major issue of child safety in our built environment. And then you've seen the other provisions talking also about block structure and cul-de-sacs and rear lots. I just can't see how, even if the requestor sold the land to the most awful developer you can imagine, consultants like me were all fired and the most awful hired guns you could possibly imagine were brought in. I can't see how the council would find itself incapable of holding a line. In fact, it would probably engage me and Mr. Tolmash to come and make sure that was the case.
I wasn't going to say, I thought they were all sitting around the room there.
Oh no, come on.
Yes.
Don't go there. I kept my tie on for this. But hopefully, sir, if it gives you some comfort, I think if we were having this conversation even 10 or 15 years ago, I think we would be looking at a hybrid, which wasn't a full master plan, but it was more detailed than the structure plan you've got. It might have the next layer of streets and blocks shown as well, or shadowed in. But I just don't think it's necessary in this case. And I'm seeing not just this developer's Oranga project that it's engaged me on, I'm looking at development in the Red Hills precinct in Waitakere. That was a precinct that the council opposed to the unitary plan. It was added by the panel. That's now developing a very connected network, even though it has a very basic precinct plan. I'm looking at the Parata development north of Pukekohe. Likewise, doesn't have a detailed master plan, but it's achieving a very connected network. Outside of Auckland, I was on a panel recently looking at a proposal in the North Lake development in North Wanaka. That's about a 1,500 house development. Likewise, that's achieved a very connected network. And it's because they all have a commonality of planning policy and subdivision expectation that I think is attributable to that, along with, as I say, that general industry acceptance that this is just how we do it now.
Okay. All right, thank you. Alan, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Munro. Yeah, I really just have one question, which is an overarching question, which you've touched on, if not covered, both in your written and your oral presentation. But when I read your evidence and I look at the exercise, what comes to me is a number of matters are still left to the council to decide at a later stage. And the experience of myself, yourself, and others is going to council and battling away as part of a section 224C certificate application, part of your subdivision, battling away with council as to what various provisions mean or what the expectation was. You're expressing great confidence in that being able to be sorted out. Maybe that's a reflection on Hamilton City Council relative to other councils around the country, but I just wonder if you've got any observations in terms of that. If I gave a cynical view that I thought there's going to be difficulties further down the line in terms of putting this in place, what would your response be?
Sir, I think there's definitely going to be a series of argy-bargy arm wrestles. And it's not going to be whether or not there should be the fundamentals like connected streets, a clear green network, a proper stormwater solution. It'll come down, as often is the case, to the individual experience and preferences of the personnel. So the argument will come down to not whether there should be a connected block network. It will be, oh, can we move a road 50 metres this way? Can we rotate some blocks around? That will be an arduous process, but that's nothing to do with the council overreaching or any kind of thing. That's just what happens when experts who take their job very seriously, trying to get the best outcome they can, sit around a table and thrash through a proposal. So I'm certainly not suggesting that there's going to be a relentlessly peaceful and boringly positive resource consent process. There will be a heck of a lot that needs to be worked through along the lines that your experience suggests. And what I'm saying is I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a check and balance in our planning process of proper rigor and proper debate between professionals on the way to seeing something get built. What I think I'm trying to say there is I think we can distinguish between the high level big picture stuff. I don't think that's in doubt. What will be debated is the execution of the detail at the individual street, the individual lot, the placement of an individual car park for an individual duplex. That I think is not going to alter the merits of the zone you're being asked to support or the thrust of the outcomes that the policy framework enables, if that makes sense. So I'm certainly in agreement with you that there will be argy-bargy. I'm just saying I don't think that's always a bad thing.
So in the context of an application such as this, and this will be a comment you've heard before, I'm sure, it's fine to have individuals like yourself come along and make these sort of presentations about how it can all turn out, what it's all going to look like and the like. How do we have confidence that someone like yourself is going to be involved in a process like this when it actually starts to be put in place?
I mean, certainly I support the rule that says the client must use Ian Munro for all services. So absolutely, that's a winner. But look, sir, I think that this is one of those, not catch-22, but it's almost unwinnable questions, because for better or worse, we have a planning process that has created a very linear and hierarchical and fractured exercise between high-level provision for growth and the detail of a builder. And it doesn't even matter whether I'm involved or not. The world's worst builder could come along at the end and just ignore a building consent. And so I think there's a point where this is where I think membership of professional institutes like the NZPI actually comes into the fore, and the acceptance that it's a team effort and many hands involved. And we either as professionals have an ability to express some confidence that there are minimum competencies that will be maintained, and that while there'll be a range of outcomes from the best possible to the least acceptable, but acceptable, could eventuate. I think we just have to have that confidence. Clearly, there are professionals that if I was in a bar with a bottle of wine, I would say I like working with more or less. But for the purpose of a rezoning exercise, I don't think it would be possible to ever support any rezoning if we had to contingency sort of select which consultants we could allow to work on it later on. But those are just matters I think the commissioners just have to accept. The process will take care of, as deeply unsatisfactory as that answer is, I know, in terms of its glibness. I just don't see another way to approach these things, sir. However, what could you do? Well, I have seen plans that use language along the lines of suitably qualified design experts in terms of who prepares some of this information or provides it, that can't go as far as specifying individuals, but can at least try and specify a minimum level of competence or qualification. most commonly that's around noise issues and the issue, you see a suitably qualified expert in acoustics must certify that the noise standard can be met, blah, blah, blah. You could certainly at the subdivision stage look at specifying that suitably qualified urban design experts or whatever expertise you felt was necessary could be involved. So that would ensure that you might not get a specific Ian Munro, but you should get someone who has a level of training and experience at least as good as him, if not much better. That might be something you can think of.
Okay. Thanks very much for that. So no, I don't have any more questions on that. Thanks, David. I just comment I'll need to flick back to the start of your evidence just to check you do have suitable qualifications. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you, sir. I hope I do.
Thanks, David.
Well, a statement that you have it isn't the same thing as having it, of course, but that's another point. Shane.
Thank you. In terms of your proposed duplex design, are you aware of it being used in any other development in the Waikato?
I am aware that there are many existing duplexes and triplexes in the Waikato. I would not be able to say with any confidence that I am sufficiently familiar with that population to say whether there is or isn't. I would say that I would be surprised if there was not an existing duplex that it wasn't at least similar to what's being proposed, because the idea of parking to one side is of itself not a new idea or a novel idea. This is just about thinking about a development that might have many, many duplexes next to each other and how that might be managed. But on an individual level, I'm sure it's almost impossible to imagine that there wouldn't be a duplex somewhere that had some arrangement similar to what's proposed.
Thank you.
Yes, I was going to ask on the duplex issue as well, and I guess it's a question of, I mean, I think as it's framed, just remind me, as it's framed at the moment, I think it's framed as a possible solution, isn't it? It's not framed as a required solution.
It's certainly not a required solution, but it's more than, it's possible to the extent that the provided land use rules would permit it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm
but
just
not a requirement.
I'm picking up Commissioner Watson's line of argument in the same way, which is, well, and as you said, argy-bargy will. I'm not sure you can use that post Malvinas, but anyway. That will occur. I guess the question is whether we should minimize the extent to which that is likely to occur. When I first read through the material, I got the impression that that the offset duplex that you're proposing, or you and Mr. Tolamash are proposing, and the relationship with the lanes was actually quite a fundamental design concept. Have I got that wrong?
No, sir. My evidence, I hope, has been very clear that it's just not realistic for councils to keep saying they want more density, but then cling to very low density suburban built form and subdivision expectations.
So I guess my question is, well, shouldn't that then be buttressed more in the provisions than simply leaving it to chance and a conversation later on down the track?
As it relates to the duplexes, sir, I don't agree with Mr. Sharman, and I don't quite understand where he sees the toehold for the council to have a real argy-bargy later. The provisions, as I read them, very clearly enable the land use construction as a permitted activity of the duplex with the car parks to the side. And there's a specific subdivision clause for a subdivision around such a duplex with a single matter of discretion focused on the Rotokauri North outcomes. So Mr. Sharman might think that somewhere in there's room for the council to unpick all this. I don't see it at all. And so while there may be lots of argy-bargy around all facets of where reserves go and how big they are and how wide roads need to be, and that's all part of the process, I just don't see where Mr. Sharman thinks the council gets to support the provisions that have been put to you the way they are, and then try and come back later and unwind it. So I'm actually very comfortable when we get to the subdivision stage of these duplexes, it won't be quite as catastrophic and calamitous as you might be thinking. But that's just how I read the provision.
Yeah. All right. So I guess you're asking us also to to consider those provisions and come to the same conclusion. You're not suggesting that that should be left vague.
I think the provisions are not vague. I think they are clear. And I think they enable the duplex that I've identified with Mr. Tolmash, including the subdivision of those duplexes, where they comply with the specified land use rule in Chapter 4, which is 4.14. And that specifically talks about the car parks and distance from side boundaries and so on. As I say, I great deal of respect for Mr. Sharman, and I think the council effort has been incredibly positive and supportive, but I haven't quite followed his thinking here.
Okay, is there anything else in terms of the design detail that you think we should pay?
Yes.
Not particular attention, but that we should satisfy ourselves we'll do the job that you're prescribed for.
Yeah. Look, the critical issue, and it's the actual key issue that this duplex problem is trying to address. It's the combination of higher densities, specifically by way of narrower lot frontages, coupled with vehicle access. And that's what will delineate between a very nice street to walk along and a street that feels like a continuous mountable curve of relentless driveways. That's what that duplex was trying to address. And I think it can and does do it effectively. The real concern I've got is that with the officer preference allowing both duplex units to be set back, I've seen developments in Takanini, and what happens is the occupants just start using the bit of lawn next to their car park as a second car park. Part of what I'm planning is to use one of the duplex units to physically stop the use of the balance of the front yard for more car parks over time because there's someone's house in the way. I would encourage you to think about making sure you're satisfied that the opportunities for car parking to come along and just continuously run along the frontage of sites can't occur. I think the provisions do that. If when you read the provisions, you don't share my optimism that it is as clear as I think, then I would invite stronger provisions in that respect to be made. The only expectation I've got for effectively unlimited car parking along an access way would be via a dedicated rear lane where pedestrians aren't required or needed to circulate. It is for servicing and private use only, and pedestrian activity is accommodated on a much higher quality street frontage as a kind of compensation. But streets themselves shouldn't be allowed to be just complete parking lanes. And I don't think the council's really, to be blunt, thought that one through yet.
All right, we shall hear more about that later on.
Okay.
That's all I had for you, Mr. Munro. Just double check any supplementaries?
No, that's fine.
Shane? Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Munro.
Thank you, panel. Good luck with it all.
Luck doesn't come into it.
Oh, doesn't it? Okay.
Right. Mr. Berry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We didn't have a conversation at the outset about what time you would like to have breaks. Our next witness is Norman Hill.
Yeah.
We'd be very happy to proceed with him.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's only 11:42, so.
I just wanted to check in with you, sir. So now Mr. Hill will address Māori cultural and spiritual values.
Thank you.
Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora, Norman.
Tēnei te mihi kia tātou katoa, te tepu, Shane Ma, David, Otira, Alan, tēnei te mihi kia tātou katoa. Just as an opening, Mr. Chairman, there's been lots of humour in this hearing, which is great. I was going to call you Uncle, given that we have the same surnames, but I won't. And I was going to wear my tie and swap it with a pounamu.
If you're going to call me Uncle, don't expect any gifts.
And I also just want to make a quick acknowledgement also to Luke and recognise his role to contributing towards the vision and strategy Te Tura Whaimana, the aspects of Tai Tumi, Tai Pari, Tai Ao, and the role he has recently played to really uplift and support Waikato Tānu in the planning space. And so I tautoko and support the mihi to Luke and his role here in Kirikiriroa, Hamilton. Mr. Chairman, I take my evidence as read, but if I can do a 2-minute summary of my key points, and I'll keep it to 2 minutes, unlike other people. I was the environmental consultant for Amberfield and Te Awa Lakes. So I've presented to the leadership here today already. And we've applied the same approach in regards to this development here at Roto Kauri. And so best practice early engagement has applied, and it is as modelled with Amberfield and Te Awa Lakes. So mana whenua Ngāti Hawa, Ngāti Tamanupō, Ngāti Mahanga, Ngāti Warere, and Ngāti Reko, inclusive of Waikato, Tainui, the area authority, have been engaged as per the provisions of the Tai Tumu Tai Pari Tai Ao, which speaks to best practice early engagement. Mana whenua have been involved in a partnership level. The role has been to ensure that mana motuhake, mana Māori, mana whenuatanga, te ture whai mana and aspects of providing betterment towards the holistic cultural wellbeing of the environment has been achieved. So that was undertaken through a series of hui, face-to-face, a number of site visits, karakia also. With the direction setting document, Te Ture Whai Mana, we held that strong in our focus to ensure that the provisions within the development have been achieved, and these are captured in the CIA, as reaffirmed in the previous speakers already. And the mitigations that have been achieved via the CIA and the ongoing partnership approach towards mana whenuatanga and the developer has resulted in mana whenua providing support to the proposal, and we look forward to ongoing partnership discussions as we venture into the next phases of this development. So on behalf of mana whenua, we recognise that ponotanga or true partnership has occurred in this approach, and we look forward to the next phases of development to ensure they're achieved in tangible, meaningful manner. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Norman.
That was only 1 minute, so just making that point. Kia ora.
We just pause there for another minute, shall we? Is that what you're suggesting? Yes. Shane.
Oh, Norm. Are you confident and happy that Te Ture Whai Mana has been complied with, and that your ongoing relationship will be as robust as you hope it to be?
Yep, in my experience, Shane, this is another exemplar on how partnership it can be achieved in an approach here in Waikato. So we're certainly confident that our Te Ture Whai Mana has been achieved, and ongoing betterment towards ecological and cultural restoration and protection will be achieved to obviously look after our local wetlands, to improve the wetlands, and no doubt uphold and provide for the receiving waterways, which is ultimately the Mangahika catchment, Tangirau, and Tōtaitone Awa Tupuna, Waikato.
It flows into the Waipa?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And just on, Shane, just on that point too, so within the main mana whenua within Kirikiriroa, all those hapu other than Ngāti Reko, so Waikiri Marae, Ngāti Reko, so Ngāti Reko have been brought into the mana whenua forum as well, so as to provide that connection to the Tangere wetland and ultimately Tōtaitone Awa or Waipa, Putanua ki Waikato. Yep.
I wonder about that connection. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Ka pai.
Alan?
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Mr. Hill, and acknowledge that we've heard you earlier at the Te Awa Lakes proposal some years ago. Yeah, I don't have a question, maybe just a comment insofar as you use the term exemplar. And I think this is an example certainly where your interests and the interests of Māori people are much better looked after when these things are sorted out, leading through to a hearing of a town planning application, for want of a better term. You know, the days, I think, of going to hearings and decision makers trying to resolve those sorts of issues, you know, you just shouldn't have to be in those sort of positions. They need to be resolved before the hearing gets underway. And that seems to be happening around the country with some of the work that, you know, we have the benefit of doing. So thanks very much. Thanks for your presentation. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Can I just add the word mana enhancing process. At the end of the day, we have equal mana in the process of kōrero. There's a saying, ko te kaya, ko te rangatira, ko te kōrero. The food of chiefs is conversation. And so throughout this whole process, we've been eating on the fruits of rangatiratanga. So tēnā koe.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you, Norman. I don't have any questions either. I just echo sentiments that have been expressed. No, I'm not quite sure whether Sonny was going to speak again or whether the mihi at the beginning covered the points he was going to make. Can you just clarify that?
Yes, so Mr. Chairman, Sonny Martinga is the chairman of the Tangata Whenua Working Group. He was just going to add to my presentation.
Okay, excellent. Yep. Thank you, Sonny.
Got it.
Tēnā koutou katoa.
Good again.
E onora he Gloria he maungarongo ki te matua te whenua he whakaro pai ki ngā tangata katoa. Tēnā koutou e te temana e ngā rangatira o te tipu. Tātou ko tainu mai nei e tēnei rā tēnā koutou katoa. My name is Sonny Martinga. I represent Ngāti Tamaini Po on the Tangata Whenua Working Group of Roto-Kauri North Plain Chain 7. I had here as the chairman of the Tangata Whenua Working Group, presenting on behalf of a collective of hapu of Ngāti Haua, Ngāti Wairere, Ngāti Mahanga, Ngāti Tamaini Po, and Ngāti Reko. Under the korowai of Waikato Tainui. We are collectively recognised as the mana whenua for this project. If I could just go to the Tangata Whenua Working Group and its genealogy of its whakapapa, just a short summary. Mahanga was the tupuna. He was the father-in-law of Tamaini Po. He married to Kotuku, his daughter. Wairere was the son of Tamaini Po. Kahurere was the daughter of Wairere, and Ngāti Haua is the son. So we have a father, son-in-law, grandson, great daughter, and a great son in this whakapapa of the Tangata Whenua Working Group. And if I can go to Ngāti Reko, Ngāti Reko is also a whakapapa to the many of the hapus, and as Norm has alluded, Ngāti Reko has been in the forefront and has come through in terms of the environmental impact that it has down at Tangirau, which is 3 k's from Ngarawahe, and the impact down there from, I guess, from way up above from Roto-Kauri and through the wetlands, and that there's been environmental issues down at the end with Ngāti Reko. So that's who we are, and that's our Tangata Whenua Working Group. I tautoko te kōrero of Norman, as reaffirmed that Roto-Kauri are historical, cultural and spiritual importance of Waikato Tainui, the hapu of previous hapus that I've mentioned. The protection of whakapapa, heritage and identity, environmental kaupapa past, present and future is of the utmost importance to us as a people. So, and if I could go away just for a little brief moment and to talk about Roto-Kauri in general in the south before pre-European. Roto-Kauri was lakes, and the surrounding areas was a largely densely native forest and wetlands with abundance of fish, birds, eels, shellfish, berries, wildlife of all different species and natural resources to sustain the everyday livelihood of the ancestors tupuna hapu who lived in this area in those times. So that's a brief history there, and if I could elaborate on some of the important issues around Roto-Kauri in times of the pakanga. Nothing did eventuate, well, there was no fightings around the vicinity, but when called upon by the tupuna, the Tautu Whero, a lot of these hapus, and especially one of them was Port Cody, and we used to take fighting warriors out of that group to go to support Portatau Te Wherowhero. And as for Ngāti Reko being involvement in here, Ngāti Reko was placed by the king, Portatau, in effect to the establishment and the safety of the paramount of the kingitanga. And Ngāti Reko was a known hapu, along with many of our other hapus, who were solely a hapu who concentrated on warfare and fighting skills. And today's terms, they would be known as the SAS or the mercenaries way back in those times. And that's just a brief history around who we are and our involvement with the development. So if I could jump past all that pakanga and all that, one of the biggest devastating effects was we all know was the invasion of colonial troops coming up, very catastrophic to our hapu, to our iwi, in terms of movements, and a lot of our tikanga and our protocols were slowly diminishing away because of colonialism. So that's just a brief history around there. And if I could jump to the Resource Management Act, which came into effect, which was one of the biggest pluses for I guess in the terms of Māori process, was that to abide and to be a part of the RMA Act. And the second one, and there's no doubt one of the biggest one, is the Waikato Tainui Raupatu landscape. Ngā mihi kia koe sei, me tō koutou maia, tō kaha, I roto I te āhua o Waikato Tainui. E rata mihi atu kia koe, e te rangatira. So when we come into the Waikato Tainui, I know we were all well educated through conversations, huis, and the whakakitenga or the Kohanga Nui Parliament. And so Robert and Shane and many of the elite of our tribes have worked together in formulating a process where we as a hapu iwi tribe can have terms impacts into our way of life. And these one of the biggest pluses that came out, two actually, is the Turi Whai Manawa Mana o Waikato Tainui and the Timu Tai Pari Tai Ao. Now this strategy, along with the implementation of the TWG at Port Cody, has been guided along by these principles in the terms of our sitting down at the table, having communication and conferences. So that allowed us a lot of space to sit in Port Cody to mitigate, to settle, to hui about a lot of the impacts and associations with Port Cody. So hence the reason that we were fortunate by all these processes that we as the Tangata Whenua Working Group can sit at the table in collaboration with developers, and in today's case with Port Cody and Quincy. So an outline of where we've come from in terms of our history and the real positives that's seeing the benefits of our people sitting at the table, making decisions and coming to a conclusion for the best outcomes of not only our people, our hapu, but for the benefit of the city and everyone else that's taking place and involved in it. So that was a brief corridor around the conversation that I thought it would be appropriate to add to as the chairman of the Tangata Whenua Working Group, to give you all a background to who we are and what we are. where we stand in line with in terms of our going ahead. In terms of the Tangata Whenua Working Group, it has a CIA assessments which talks about our involvement and a lot of the things that the hapus have done in Roto-Koti, not all at once, but in different time spans. We all had a time of play in that area. I'd like to just to move forward now in where we began with Mr. Ma and Greet Seed and his advisors. So we began consultation hui with the Ropu around 2018. Before that, I think the group, Charles Ma and that, were in consultation with Waikato Tainui. Waikato Tainui put them on to the Hamilton City Council. The Hamilton City Council then put them on to the Te Hao Te Whenua, who deals with the Resource Management Act mandated by the tribe and the Hamilton City Council. So hence here we are. And one of the things that I guess we were all really responded to was that the first hui we had with Green Seed, that Charles Ma had come personally. And that was a plus for, I guess, for all of the kaumatuas who are on these representatives on this board to actually sit down to have a facial conference with the developer himself. He came along with his team of consultants, and that was the first one that we actually engaged. And to have a first conversation with, I guess, with anybody was not over phone nor on iPad, but to sit there and give an overall view of where he wants to go and how he wants to make partnership, real partnership with Tangata Whenua and everyone else. So that was Mr. Charles. Our key focus was to ensure that the PC7 help in restoring the mauri of the whenua, the wai, and to ensure the environmental kaupapa to tiaki and manakitia, our taonga species, was captured in any future development at the site. We led a karakia at the site. We held a hui regularly, maybe about, I think we've had over 16 sessions. Some were robust, some were just updates, some were mitigation, some were planning, some were to go back to here, the environmental corridor. We did actually have about, I think there was two environmental groups. One had Mr. Mackenzie, and there's the new one that came on. And I guess with this, with these two people, we were talking around the impact and assessing the environment of the wastewater, the drainage down to Ngāti Reko, everything that's involved around the project. So they were very good conversations. We also had Wiki Toria from Waikato Tainui, who was the representative of their Kui Whai Manua, and also of the Taipari Taiao Taitimu project. So we were in capable hands of getting first-hand views into all of their situations from the right people that were sitting at the table. We raised several key points regarding protecting the holistic well-being of the whenua, wai, and ecology, and to work together with Green Seed to capture key mitigation outcomes for our people. Based on 3 years consultation process, we put our PO in the ground in terms of upholding our values of Taitumu, Taipari, Taiao. And in doing so, we ensured the heritage value of the whenua will be protected. The local wai will be enhanced, and the tonga of the kaunga and karaherehe, wetlands and airport will be better than the current situation. We use the traditional mana whenua names for streets and neighbourhood names. We renamed the significant natural areas, kahikatea stand, and any associated future reserves to Kereru Reserve. We will enhance the biodiversity and cultural values of the reserve. We will achieve restoration and use of indigenous plants, species, and riparian, restoration as street trees and open spaces, reserves, landscaping design that reflects culture and perspective. Protecting and treating stormwater, manage water take where applicable, develop of wetlands, and we continue to explore partnerships outcomes for our people. Overall, we felt our mana was respected and partnership process and kōrero that we undertook with Green Seed. We have built a meaningful and enduring partnership with the developer and Green Seed, and we look forward to the next phase of the project to realise and hopefully achieve legacy outcomes for our taiao and our people. Our key strategic aims to protect and preserve, identify and integrity and uphold the principle of kaitiakitanga o ngā uri whakatupu. So, nō reira, e roranga tira mā, ka oti ngā kōrero, nēra me atu ki a koutou katoa. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, kia ora mai tātou.
Kia ora, Sonny. Thank you very much. Shane, any follow-up?
Kia ora, Sonny. Thank you for that. And hopefully the mana whenua narrative will continue to guide the development. You speak of the environmental enhancement, but also looking at the social outcomes as well for mana whenua.
Absolutely. Kia ora. Tēnā koe, Shane.
Bye. Thank you.
Alan, anything?
Yeah, no questions on that. Thanks very much for the presentation. It's very informative and very useful to have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sonny, and thank you, Norman. Okay. Mr. Barry, that would seem a useful time to have a break. We're at home. I don't know about you. What sort of timing do you recommend?
20 minutes. Is this the morning tea break, sir, or the lunch break?
I think it's a lunch break, but if you only want tea, that's up to you.
No, that's so 45 minutes. Yeah. 45 minutes, sir.
45? Okay, so well, let's call it back 10 to 1 in that case, shall we?
Yes, sir. Could I just ask before we break?
Yep.
Whether you have any questions for Mr. Mill? He's the surveyor.
I didn't. I thought it was a nice piece of evidence and was pretty crystal clear, but let me just check. Alan, Shane, any questions for Mr. Mill?
No, I think it's a very helpful statement of evidence, but my experience with surveyors is they're not that great at answering questions anyhow, not being disrespectful. Thank you.
No questions from me.
Yeah. No, I mean, if Mr. Mill wants to go about his business, that's fine. I mean, I guess I should have really asked Mr. Sharman whether that was there was still an issue in point on that, but I mean, certainly absolutely understand where Mr. Mill was coming from and what his reasoning is. So if we need him back, we'll address that at that point.
Certainly, sir. We'd be happy for Mr. Sharman to address that issue now, if you'd like.
Are you there, Craig?
Yes, I am. No, there's no issue there. So I likewise found the Mr. Milne evidence helpful on the legal matters and the various property mechanisms. So there's no issues that HCC will be raising or that I will be raising. Okay, excellent. So yeah, he's dismissed.
When we come back, we'll be into Mr. Leo Hill's evidence.
Yeah, well, I thought it was, before we get that sort of technical stuff, it'd be good to have a bite and some sustenance. So look forward to it. Okay, so turn your screens and mics off, and we'll be back in at 12:50. Okay, thank you.